well, what would happen with a system like this? Are there bad things that could go wrong, or things that could go awry if we were living in such a world? Or would it just be a world of unmitigated inside knowledge of everyone who is out and about? So how do you think it would work?
Well, I personally think it would be terrifying. I am a very touchy-feely person, not in an appropriate way, but I do theater. And you can imagine how it would be like if everybody could just instantly know everything about you just in the common interaction of rubbing your head. I agree that it can make the process very expedite the process, but kind of terrifying for me.
So that's a concern, but of course, people who were confident that they had the right brain and the right skull shape would have, of course, nothing to be frightened of, because as anyone inspected you, all they would see is the evidence of your worth. And so the only people who would object, again, would be people who you might want to be concerned about otherwise. And then the other thought about that is we all are making first impressions all the time. Now we'll judge people on the basis of their appearance, on their clothing, and these are fully arbitrary issues. There was a famous study that was done here many years ago where all of the Harvard courses are evaluated through a system. They do an end-of-course evaluation called the Q Guide. And someone did a study where they videotaped some of the faculty, and they would show an audience of people a 30-second clip of the person lecturing with the sound off. And so they were evaluating purely the visual performance of this professor lecturing. And it turned out the assessment based on that evaluation of the person moving on a stage correlated extremely well with the actual end-of-course evaluations. So as you all were evaluating this performance, even before we had started speaking, the assessments you had made of our appearance, because you rely on such superficial things, are likely going to correlate with what you would say about us at the end of the night. And that, to me, seems much more threatening than if you had an honest scientific way to seriously evaluate someone grounded in brain science and phrenology.
So in a scenario where we have people just judging based upon appearance, just babies get thrown away? Like, is that the plan?
Well, no.
To be fair, I think we would give them to the wolves to be raised, much like Spartans.
Or Romulus and Remus.
Or Romulus and Remus, and we know how well they did.
Yeah.
They created society, I believe.
Well, now, although
one of them did.
To be fair to the phrenologists, there are different ways in which you could implement this. So that you could try to evaluate someone at the moment of birth. I don't know how many of you have ever palpated the head of a newborn. It's quite malleable.
I don't know what you mean by palpate, but I assume it's a positive thing, right?
Satisfyingly squishy.
Very squishy. You want it to be flexible because it's got a lot to get through to get out. And so to be fair to someone...
Sorry, I was just visualizing. Now, when you squeeze a newborn's head, that's how you activate thought, right? It's like when a newborn draws its chest out, it's an inhaling air. So if we massage and squeeze like a pump, is that what we're saying? I believe that's...
It's been a long time since I delivered babies, but you can think of it.
I'm just taking notes in case I want to make sure I'm squeezing properly. I want my son to go to, or daughter to go to a good college. Is it 3 pumps or...
Well, now, of course, that raises an issue, a frequent misunderstanding that people would have about phrenology. So if the idea is that the skull is responsive to the shape of the underlying brain, then it raises this question, could you then alter the shape of the skull in some way with the goal of then trying to affect the underlying brain function? And so I think most of the phrenologists would say that that is a barbaric misunderstanding of what was happening, and none of them would endorse that kind of attempt to mask what your true inner qualities were.
So that's like the plastic surgery of phrenology.
Yeah, no.
It's like the fake brain lumps.
No. What wasn't meant to be an interventional science.
True, but I mean, it could lead to great discoveries. I mean, if we all are familiar with the artifact of Back to the Future, Dr. Emmett Brown was sitting upon his toilet and he slipped and he hit his forehead, and then he saw a vision of the flux capacitor, which led to time travel, which we all know is real.
Well, now, it certainly might be possible that you could stimulate these areas of the brain to try to bring out the best or the worst aspects of a person. And if you look at the maps of the different sorts of brain areas that you might stimulate, there's a wide world of imagination of what you might do if you could do this. A phrenologist would say, well, you do this by applying pressure or possibly applying heat to try to activate these underlying brain areas. One of the things that's interesting in our non-phrenological world is that kind of brain stimulation is something that is actively pursued by neuroscientists to try to stimulate regions of the brain either through magnetic energy or through electrical energy. And that impulse is very similar to what people would have thought in this world of phrenology.
Okay. So in a sense, we're already sort of doing phrenology.
Well, so if any neuroscientists in the room will be offended if I answer this question? No, good.
I don't see any hands. Go ahead.
Let's sing them.
Yeah, get them.
So if you go back through those first 4 claims that I mentioned, that the brain is the organ of thought, that different functions of the brain, of different mental functions are localized in different brain areas, certainly there'd be no debate amongst those two amongst a neuroscientist. Does size matter? You could probably find debates about that. Some people, there is a lot of measurement of brain size, size of brain regions that takes place. Sometimes they're looking at activity measured in various ways, but there is something, size or something analogous, that most neuroscientists would say matters. It might be connectivity, but something there matters. The only issue that a modern neuroscientist would fault, in addition to the identity of the regions that were localized, they would have a new map, but it would be a map nonetheless, is this notion that the brain areas impinge on the skull such that you could palpate. They would reject that, but now they have much better technologies. So you can do things with PET scans or functional magnetic resonance imaging, which essentially does what the phrenologists wanted to do in a different way. More invasive, you can't just look at someone and see their underlying brain activity, although sometimes people's faces will give away what's going on inside their heads. But the idea would be you would put someone in a scanner, and then you could measure the size, the activity of all these regions in a way that a phrenologist would have known and loved.
So what you're saying is maybe there are some elements that just the technology at the time weren't able to get towards the root of the cause, and now we're seeing indications that there could have been some validity to?
Yeah, and not only that, some of the concerns that you all had on hearing how phrenology might have worked have also resurfaced in this domain of functional neuroimaging. People, and this is still a hypothetical situation, but you could imagine a situation where you bring someone in for a job interview, and instead of doing the skull massage, you say, well, just come into the scanner for a moment. And then you would ask them a series of questions, and then you'd confront them with a scenario. And there are research labs here on campus that use neuroimaging as part of experimental philosophy studies, where they'll ask people moral dilemmas and see which parts of the brain activate. And you can use these. The technology still has some glitches, but they're hoping to develop lie detection capacity. One thing that you can do very well is you can find out if someone has seen a person before. So if you were doing a police lineup, it turns out different brain areas activate if it's a novel face versus a face of someone you know well. And so if you're trying to figure out, is this person associated with this known criminal, you just show them a series of pictures, and if they recognize the face, then you have your suspect.